Jesus and his disciples had been working hard to spread the good word of God. They had traveled around the Sea of Galilee and beyond, telling special stories to crowds of people and teaching them all about God. Jesus and his disciples called their special stories parables, and townsfolk would come from all over to hear Jesus tell his parables. Jesus had also been performing miracles, showing the people his remarkable gifts and blessings from God. On one particular day, Jesus had fed thousands of people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. You might already know that story, called the feeding of the 5,000. The disciples had seen Jesus perform this miracle, but didn't quite understand. Did Jesus do some trick to make more bread and find more fish? On the evening of this day, Jesus and his disciples were feeling tired. It had been a long day. Jesus had fed the crowds, told them lots of parables, and even healed their sick people. His disciples wanted to start their journey to the next destination. It was getting late in the day, and they were in a remote part of the lake. The villages were quite far away, and they had planned to travel on to Capernaum and Gennesaret. These were small settlements across the Sea of Galilee that they needed to travel to by boat. But Jesus told his disciples to take the boats and go on ahead without him. He would dismiss the crowd and go up into the mountains to pray. He thanked the crowd for listening and dismissed them for the day. The news had recently reached Jesus and his disciples that their dear old friend John the Baptist had been killed by King Herod. Perhaps Jesus wanted to pray for John the Baptist, or perhaps he just wanted to talk to God, his Father, privately. And so the disciples got into boats and started their journey across the water to the towns of Capernaum and Gennesaret. Jesus traveled along to a nearby mountainside and stayed there to pray for some time. He could see the disciples' boats traveling out on the lake, buffeted by a strong wind. They were already some way away from the shore. Jesus stayed on the mountain until the early hours of the morning, praying to God. He thought about his day preaching to the townspeople, healing the sick, and performing miracles. Then, when he was ready to finish praying and come down from the mountainside, he looked out to the waters. He could still see the boats of disciples floating around some way away on the lake. It was shortly before dawn. Jesus went down to the edge of the shore and began to walk. He stepped onto the water, which rippled and waved gently beneath his feet. Step by step, he walked onto the water towards the disciples' boat. His disciples were not sleeping. They had been looking out of the boat and across the water, hoping to catch a glimpse of Jesus coming down the mountainside. They had been looking out of the boat and across the water. When they saw the figure of Jesus coming across the water towards them, they felt terrified and they cried out,
"It's a ghost! Ah!"
The The disciples may have been so scared because of a superstition that was widespread in the age when Jesus walked the earth. They believed that seeing a spirit before dawn would bring bad things to their lives, and they were frightened that the figure walking on the water in front of them was a spirit. Surely a man couldn't carry out such a feat. But then Jesus called to them across the water and tried to calm them.
Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid.
The disciples heard the voice of their leader and teacher Jesus, and they felt bewildered. They looked across the cold blue ripples of the windy lake and squinted towards the figure. Then, with courage, Peter called out,
Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water.
Jesus heard Peter call to him, and he called back,
Come.
For the first few steps, to the amazement of the other disciples, Peter walked cleanly across the surface of the water, with ripples forming beneath his feet, just like Jesus had. The disciples watched in wonder, their eyes wide. But after the first few steps, the wind blew harder, and the dark sea rumbled beneath Peter's feet. He looked down into the deep black water and began to feel frightened again. The wind puffed and wailed around him, and his feet sank into the water. Peter cried out,
Lord, save me! Lord, save me, please!
The disciples cried and shouted as Peter sank into the water. Surely he would drown in the windy sea. But Jesus heard Peter's cry. Jesus walked towards him. Jesus extended his hands, and he caught Peter, wailing and thrashing just as he was about to drown. He took Peter's hand and brought him back to the boat. Peter and Jesus both stepped back into the boat. Peter shook the water from his clothes. Jesus said to Peter,
You of little faith, why did you doubt?
The wind had dropped now, and the deep waters of the Sea of Galilee were cold and still again. Peter and the other disciples were amazed. Surely they had seen a miracle. Jesus had walked on water and rescued Peter from certainly drowning. And indeed, Peter had walked on water for just a few steps too, guided by Jesus. All the disciples dropped to their knees and worshipped Jesus. They reached out towards Jesus, saying,
Truly, you are the Son of God.
Now they felt ashamed, for they knew the Son of God wouldn't need to rely on tricks or schemes. Jesus had faith in God, and God had provided for Jesus and his followers. The disciples had witnessed the miracles of the feeding of the 5,000, and the miracle of Jesus walking on water. How lucky they were! Now they understand that Jesus was truly the Son of God. Disciples took up the oars again and continued the journey onto the small towns of Gennesaret and Capernaum. When they reached these places, they told all the local people about the amazing things they had seen Jesus do and the wonderful parables he had told them. The townsfolk of these places recognized Jesus. They had already heard word of a wonderful preacher who had come from God to help the people of the world. They brought out their sick and wounded and took them to Jesus, begging him to let the sick touch the hem of his cloak. Jesus was kind, and he let all the sick people come to him. All those who truly believed in the word of God were healed when they touched his clothes, and they danced and celebrated in the streets of Gennesaret and Capernaum. And so, the good news about Jesus and his miracles continued to spread throughout the land.